The water was always cold, not the refreshing chill of a mountain stream, but a deep, bone-aching cold that seeped from the stone floor of our cottage and lived in the clay basin. My hands, raw and cracked, plunged into it before the first gray light touched the sky over the ironwood pack. This was my dawn. A mountain of other people's laundry, smelling of sweat and pine and distant wealth, waited beside me. It was a world of gray water, gray soap, gray dress, gray future. I was Alara. I was 19, and I was invisible. For 5 years, since the fever took my father, I had been the anchor. My mother, Leora, moved through our 2 rooms like a ghost, her songs silenced by grief. My brother Kale, 14, with eyes too old for his face, scavenged the woods for food. My sister Mila, just 12, mended clothes until her small fingers cramped, and I washed. I washed to keep the moss-stuffed roof over our heads and the thin gruel in our bowls. Each day was the same, a grinding cycle of exhaustion, a future written in calluses and chill. But the cold water wasn't the only secret in our crumbling cottage. There was another, a legacy written not in grime, but in moonlight. My mother, before love and loss bound her to Ironwood, had not been a peasant. She had been Leora of the Celestial Chorus, a revered dancer who performed sacred rites for the royal family itself. Her grace was legend, and in the deep silence, long after Kale and Mila slept, she passed this legacy to me. "The dance is not just movement, my starlight," her whispered voice echoed in my memory as I scrubbed a lord's tunic. "It is a language, a prayer written in the blood, our blood." In those secret hours, I learned steps that mapped forgotten constellations, gestures that told stories older than the kingdom. It was our stolen joy. Then the fever came again. It took my mother, as it took anyone in Ironwood that fortune forgot, and with her the music in my soul died. What was the point of dancing when it couldn't fill Kale's hollow belly or stop Mila's shivers? I locked the beautiful, useless art away, buried it. Until the morning the courier came. He picked through the mud of our lane like it was poison, his clothes neat, his expression pinched. He thrust a scroll sealed with emerald wax into my wet hand. For the girl, Alara. The paper was thick, fragrant. The words were elegant, sharp. An invitation, no, a summons, from Lady Seraphine of Highcliffe. "You are commanded to attend the Royal Zenith Feast as an observer of my household. The Alpha King, Theron, hosts this gathering. It is instructive for those from humble circumstances to witness the pinnacle of our society. Suitable attire will be provided. Your attendance is not optional." I read it 3 times, the fine paper trembling. Not optional. This was no honor, it was a sentence. Kale's face darkened. "It's a trap. They want to laugh at you." Mila clung to my arm, whispering about castles and fine food. My own heart, hardened by a lifetime of being unseen, screamed a warning. This was a game for wolves, and I was to be the lamb led to slaughter. To refuse was to insult a noble directly, an offense that could bring ruin down on my family. I had no choice. 3 days later, wearing a coarse gray dress finer than anything I owned, but still marking me as an outsider, I sat in a bumping cart headed for the Eyrie, the king's mountain citadel. The towers clawed at the twilight sky, windows blazing with 1,000 mocking stars. The cart didn't stop at the grand staircase where silken nobles alighted. It rattled to the back, the servants' entrance. A stern housekeeper met me. "You are the observer from Ironwood. Follow. Do not speak. Do not touch. You are here to watch, not to be seen." She led me through a labyrinth of stone, the sounds of laughter and music growing louder, a beautiful, terrifying roar. Then she opened a door, and my world shattered into a million glittering, hostile pieces. The grand hall was a cavern of gold and fire, vast enough to swallow my entire village. The air smelled of perfume and roasted meat and unimaginable power. Wolves in silks and furs moved with a predatory grace, their laughter like shattering crystal, and at the far end, on a throne of obsidian, sat Alpha King Pharaon. He was younger than the stories, but his youth was a lie. He radiated a calm, terrifying authority, dark hair, a stern jaw, and eyes the color of a winter storm scanning his domain. My breath hitched. I tried to vanish into the shadow of a pillar. A voice, sweet and cutting as a honed blade, sliced through the murmur. Ah, there she is. All heads turned. Lady Seraphine glided forward, a vision in sapphire silk and diamonds, her smile a razor. My lords and ladies, my guest, Alara of the Ironwood Pack, she is a laundress. She let the word hang, dirty and sharp. Titters rippled through the crowd. I thought it educational for her to witness true wolves. The weight of 100 scornful gazes pressed down on me. Seraphine took my arm, her grip deceptively gentle. Come, dear, don't be shy. What followed was a slow, exquisite torture. She paraded me like a curious bug. Lord Balthus, she washes tunics, can you imagine? Lady Corvina, have you ever seen a roasted peacock, child? Or is gruel the height of cuisine in Ironwood? Each question was a dart, each laugh a lash. I answered in monosyllables, my voice thin. Through it all, I felt the distant, storm-gray gaze of the king. Did I see a flicker of boredom or something else? I was given a seat at the very end of a table, next to a snoring guardsman. The food was exquisite. It tasted like ash. The opulence was a slap in the face. How much here would feed Ironwood for a year? The anger began to simmer, hot and fierce beneath the shame. I thought the humiliation was over. I was wrong. As crystal glasses were refilled, Seraphine rose again, tapping for silence. My friends, we have observed the traditions, but what is a celebration without unique entertainment? Her glacial eyes found me, pinning me to my chair. Our humble observer has been so quiet. I propose she participate. I understand her mother had some connection to the arts, a folk dance, perhaps. It would be so charming. The court erupted in delighted, vicious applause. This was her final move. The peasant would dance a clumsy jig, the ultimate joke. Musicians struck up a tune, not a simple folk melody, but a complex, demanding court piece, a trap within a trap. If I refused, I insulted them all. If I tried and failed, I was a fool. Every eye was upon me. The king leaned forward, his expression unreadable. My legs were water. The gilded hall blurred. In the terror, I heard my mother's voice, clear as a bell. When words fail, my starlight, let your body speak your truth. I had no words. I had only a truth of loss, of secret beauty, of a pride that refused to break for their amusement. I stood. The crowd parted, a sea of silk and spite. I walked to the center of the floor. The music swelled, demanding a beginning. I closed my eyes, and I let my mother's legacy unlock. My first movement was not a step, it was a stance. The vigil of the veiled moon, a sacred pose of mourning and resilience known only to the celestial chorus. My back straightened with a sorrowful dignity. My arms rose, speaking of unbearable weight. A dead silence fell. The laughter died. And I began to dance. The world fell away. I was no longer Alara the laundress in a hall of wolves. My body, moving into the second sequence, a slow, turning step that mirrored a waning crescent, became a vessel for something ancient. The cheap gray wool of my dress melted into insignificance. It was the movement that transfigured me, the pure, unadorned grace flowing from a deep, untapped well. My raw, red hands, usually clenched in labor, unfolded like pale flowers. Each finger traced a story on the air. I didn't follow the complex music meant to trip me. I conversed with it. My leaps carried a weightless sorrow. My extensions were a reach for something perpetually out of grasp. This was no rustic jig. This was an elegy, a prayer, a history written in muscle and memory. The stunned silence in the hall changed. The condescending amusement evaporated, replaced by a bewildered, breathless awe. Spoons halted halfway to mouths. The sneering nobles watched now with parted lips. They were witnessing a mystery. How? How could a peasant move with the precision of a master? How could her simple performance hold a power their polished entertainments lacked? At the high table, Lady Seraphine's perfect smile shattered. It lay in pieces around the tense line of her mouth. Her eyes were wide not with delight, but with dawning, cataclysmic horror. Her plan hadn't just failed, it had rebounded with a force she could not comprehend. And on the obsidian throne, Alpha King Theron was no longer leaning forward. He was rigid. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white. The storm in his eyes had stilled into a focused, piercing intensity. He was not watching a curious performance. He was deciphering a code. He knew these forms, not from court balls, but from the faded, restricted texts in the royal archives, from whispered legends of the sacred ritualists. The Vigil of the Veiled Moon was a rite performed only in times of profound royal loss, a dance for a queen. A low, instinctive growl vibrated in his chest, so soft only the wolf within him heard it. His blood, the ancient royal blood, began to sing. It was a pull, a resonance, a missing chord in the world's song suddenly struck. I felt it too. A strange heat bloomed in my core, a golden thread of connection pulsing in time with the music, with my heartbeat, and with the steady, powerful rhythm of the Alpha King's presence at the far end of the hall. It was terrifying, exhilarating, a tether I didn't understand, pulling me toward a destiny I couldn't fathom. But I couldn't stop. The dance had its own momentum, my mother's spirit guiding me through the final, heartbreaking sequence, the ascent of the silver thread, a movement of fragile, stubborn hope. I finished as I began, in the opening stance of mourning, head bowed, arms finally still. The last note hung in the air and faded. For 3 heartbeats, the silence was absolute. Then Alpha King Theron rose to his feet. The sound of his chair scraping marble was thunder in the quiet. Every head whipped toward the dais. When the king stood, the entire court stood with him, a wave of motion driven by shock and protocol. He did not speak immediately. His storm-gray eyes were locked on me as I stood trembling in the center, the reality of what I had just done crashing down. I had revealed everything, my secret, my mother's legacy. For what? Theron descended the steps. His footfalls echoed. The sea of nobility parted before him, a tide of silk and uncertainty receding. He walked until he stood before me, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gaze, the faint scar along his jaw. He was immense, not just in stature, but in the aura of raw, restrained power that radiated from him. Yet his expression was not angry. It was profoundly serious, etched with a wonder that bordered on disbelief. His voice, when it came, was low, meant for me first, yet carrying to every straining ear. That, he said, the word weighted with awe, was not a folk dance. I could only stare, my throat tight. Those were the movements of the celestial chorus, the vigil of the veiled moon. He stated it as a fact rewriting history. A sacred royal ritual lost for 3 generations, a dance performed only by initiated ritualists of the highest lineage. A gasp rippled through the court. Sacred, royal, lost. He took 1 step closer. The golden thread between us pulled taut, humming. "You," he said, his voice dropping even lower, yet ringing with a power both alpha and primal. "When you danced, the moon bond awakened. I felt it snap into place, the bond that chooses a king's mate, the bond that has been silent for a century." He didn't shout it. He didn't need to. The words fell into the silent hall with the impact of a falling star. "You, Alara of Ironwood, daughter of Leora, are my fated Luna." Chaos. Instant, deafening chaos. The hall exploded. Shouts, exclamations, gasps of pure, utter disbelief. Laundress, Moonbond, Luna. It was inconceivable. It upturned every law of society. Lady Seraphine made a sound like a wounded animal. "No, it cannot be. This is a trick. She is a nothing, a peasant. She has bewitched you." Pharaon turned his head just slightly toward the sound. The look he gave her was one of cold, utter finality. "You," he said, and the single word silenced her scream. "You brought my destined mate before this court to mock her. Your words now only confirm the poverty of your spirit, not her worth." He turned back to me. I stood frozen, the world spinning. Mate, Luna, destiny. The words were too huge, too impossible.
"This is too much," I whispered so only he could hear. "I'm no one. I have a brother and sister who are hungry right now. I have a home that is crumbling. I cannot be this." Farron's expression softened, just a fraction. In his eyes I saw not just alpha command, but a dawning protectiveness, an understanding of the storm he'd unleashed. "The no one you speak of just performed a miracle. The no one you speak of holds a legacy that is the key to our kingdom's oldest magic." He reached out, his hand hovering near mine, not touching, but the heat of the bond flared between us. "And the no one you speak of is now the most important person in this realm. Your family will want for nothing. Your home will be here." He paused, his gaze holding mine captive. "This is not a choice of convenience, Ilara. This is a calling of blood and moon. But the choice to accept it, that ultimately is still yours." He was giving me a choice in front of his entire shocked, hostile court. The act of offering it was more staggering than the declaration itself. But could I truly choose? Could I walk away from a bond that already felt like a root growing in my soul? Could I condemn Kale and Mila to continued starvation when salvation was offered? Was this destiny or another, far more beautiful trap? The golden thread pulsed, warm, insistent, terrifying, and the eyes of the court, of Lady Seraphine burning with hatred, watched, waiting for the laundress's answer. The choice hung in the air, fragile as a soap bubble in the roaring wind of the court's shock. My own heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. Mate, Luna. The words were a foreign incantation, a spell that promised to dissolve the very ground beneath my feet. My eyes flickered past Theron's intense gaze, to the sea of faces behind him. I saw Lady Seraphine, her beautiful face now a mask of pure, venomous hatred. I saw lords and ladies whose eyes gleamed with new, cold strategies, how to exploit this impossible turn. I saw the assessing looks of older alphas, warriors who saw not a Luna, but a weakness in their king. This was not a sanctuary. It was a more dangerous wood than Ironwood, where the wolves wore silk and their teeth were hidden behind smiles. "My family," I whispered again, the words a lifeline to the only reality I understood. "Kale, Mila, they are alone in the dark right now. They do not know if I will return with coins or not at all." The image of Mila's hopeful face, of Kale's defensive scowl, was a physical ache. "Your words are kind, Your Majesty, but promises are air to those who have breathed only disappointment." Farron did not flinch from the stark truth in my words. He nodded slowly, a gesture of respect that sent another wave of murmurs through the hall. He was acknowledging my doubt, my fear. He was not commanding my obedience. "Then let us replace air with stone," he said, his voice resonating with absolute authority. He turned his head just slightly, addressing a broad-shouldered man with a captain's insignia who stood rigidly near the dais. "Captain Rylan, take a full squad of the King's Guard, travel to Ironwood with the speed of the moon's chase, find the household of Ilara. You will secure her brother Kale and her sister Mila. You will treat them with the honor due to the Luna's kin. Bring them to the Eyrie. No harm, no slight, no delay. Their comfort and safety are now your highest duty. Go." The captain slammed a fist to his chest. "By your command, your majesty." He turned on his heel and strode from the hall, his boots ringing on marble, the urgency in his stride silencing any protest before it could form. Farron looked back to me, his storm-gray eyes held mine captive. "Before sunset tomorrow, your siblings will be under this roof, fed, warmed, and safe. That is my vow, etched not in air, but in the action of my guard." His storm-gray eyes held mine. Is the stone solid enough to stand upon? I felt the first crack in the wall of my resistance. He hadn't just promised, he had acted with a speed and decisiveness that spoke of a will that moved mountains. The terrified part of me wondered if this was just another form of control, but the larger part, the part that wept with relief at the thought of Mila sleeping in a warm bed, clung to it. And if I say no, the question was barely audible, a treasonous breath. After they are safe, if this bond, if I am not what you need, if I bring you only scorn from your court, I gestured weakly at the stunned, hostile nobility. A ghost of a smile, fierce and proud, touched Theron's lips. Let them scorn. A king ruled by the scorn of lesser wolves is no king at all. The moon goddess does not make mistakes, Ilara. She chose a daughter of the celestial Porus, a woman who carries grace as her birthright and strength as her armor. He took a half step closer, the space between us crackling. You asked what I need. I need a Luna who knows the cost of loyalty, not its price. I need one who understands the people, all the people, from the highest tower to the lowest cottage. He gestured weakly at the stunned, hostile nobility. This court has forgotten the smell of earth, the weight of true hunger. You have not. He held my gaze. The choice remains. When your siblings arrive, you may leave with them. You will have my protection and gold enough to secure your futures far from here. Or you may stay. Learn what it means to be Luna. Discover why the moon goddess paired a king with a laundress. He offered his arm, not his hand, a gesture of partnership, not possession. The generosity of the offer was its own kind of weapon. It disarmed my defiance. It spoke of a confidence so absolute he did not need to force me. He believed in the bond, in me, enough to let me walk away. Before I could form a thought, a sharp voice cut through the tension. Lord Corbin, an older noble with a fox-like face. "Your Majesty, wisdom, please! This is unprecedented. The moon bond is sacred, yes, but surely it must be verified by the High Priestess. The girl's lineage, her mother disappeared under mysterious circumstances. What if this is a ploy?" He spoke about me as if I were a diseased animal. Farron's expression hardened. "The bond verifies itself, Corbin. I feel it, she feels it. That is the only verification the moon goddess requires." He looked back to me, his gaze asking silent permission. I gave a tiny, tight nod. The secrets were gone. As for her mother, she was Leora, the greatest ritualist of her generation, who left for love. That is no mystery. It is a tragedy for our kingdom that her gifts were lost. He turned his gaze back to the court, a challenge in his eyes. Now they are found. The discussion is not whether Ilara is my mate. The discussion is how this court will welcome its Luna. An elderly lady, her back straight as a spear, stepped forward. Lady Moira. Her face was lined with wisdom, not malice. She bowed first to Theron, then, surprisingly, offered a deeper, respectful nod to me. "Your Majesty, my lady." Her voice was clear and calm. The dance, it was the true vigil. I saw it performed once, as a child, by the last true ritualist. I never thought to see it again. It is a sign, clear as moonlight. The court may rustle with surprise like dry leaves, but the old trees know the wind has changed. She met my eyes. "Welcome, daughter of Leora. The Eyrie has been waiting for you." This endorsement was a lifeline. It gave others permission to bend. I was overwhelmed. I looked from Lady Moira's kind eyes to Theron's waiting ones. The golden thread pulsed. Warm, steady.
It wasn't a demand, it was an invitation, a terrifying, impossible invitation to step out of the gray, grinding certainty of poverty and into a dazzling, dangerous unknown. I thought of my mother's hands guiding me. I thought of Mila's laugh and Kale's stubborn courage. I thought of the cold water in the basin and the endless, back-breaking pile of laundry. I took a shuddering breath. My decision crystallized not from ambition, but from a fierce, protective love and a spark of defiant hope. I placed my raw, work-worn fingers lightly on the rich, dark velvet of Theron's sleeve. The contact sent a jolt through both of us. The bond sang in approval. "I will stay," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I will learn, for my family, and to see if a laundress can truly be a Luna." A true, full smile, brief but brilliant, transformed Theron's solemn face. It was like the sun breaking through a winter storm. I would expect nothing less. As he led me through the parted crowd toward the high table, the whispers began again, now laced with a new, fearful respect. The game was over, a new one had begun, and as I walked, head high, beside the Alpha King, I knew the most dangerous part was just starting. For in the shadows of the gilded hall, amidst the bowed heads, I had seen the glint of pure, unyielding hatred in Seraphine's eyes. The wolf who had planned my humiliation would not simply slink away. She had just lost everything, and a cornered wolf is the most deadly kind of all. The chamber they led me to was not a cell, but it felt like one. After the deafening spectacle of the hall, the sudden silence was a physical pressure. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast a boar. Thick carpets swallowed sound. The bed was a vast expanse of embroidered silk. A window of real glass looked out over the moonlit, sprawling city and the dark band of the forest beyond. It was a prison of luxury. I stood in its center, utterly lost. A maid, a girl not much older than me, with timid eyes, curtsied. "My Lady Luna, I am Mara. I am to attend you. Would you like me to help you undress?" The title, Luna, struck me like a slap. "No," I said, too quickly. "Thank you. I need to be alone." When she slipped out, I was engulfed by the silence. I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Somewhere out there, Captain Rylan was riding hard for Ironwood. Had Kale tried to fight them? Was Mila terrified? A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. A soft knock. Before I could answer, the door opened. Lady Moira entered, purposeful and quiet. She carried a tray with a steaming cup and simple bread and cheese. "I thought you might not feel up to facing the feast again," she said gently, "and rich food on a strained heart is never wise." I stared, suspicion warring with a desperate need for guidance. "Why are you being kind to me? You are a high-born lady. I am—" "You are the Luna," she finished firmly, "and you are a young woman who has had the world turned upside down in an hour. The two facts are not separate." She gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Hesitantly, I sat. Moira took the chair opposite, her keen eyes studying me. "You saw the hatred in Seraphine's eyes. Good. You should see it. That is the first lesson of this cage. Know your enemies. But do not mistake all who bow for friends either. Many out there are simply waiting to see which way the wind blows. They will smile and call you Luna while they decide if you are an obstacle or a tool." My shoulders slumped. How can I possibly survive this? I don't know their rules, their games. I can't even read more than my name. "You survived Ironwood," Moira countered. "You survived Seraphine's trap tonight and turned it into a triumph. That is a different kind of strength, one this court has forgotten." She leaned forward. "As for the games, play none of them. It is the only way to win. Be exactly who you are. It is your greatest weapon and their greatest confusion." "Who I am is a laundress," I whispered, the truth aching.
Who you are, Moira corrected softly, is a woman raised with a sacred legacy who knows the weight of water and the value of bread. Who you are is the daughter of Leora, whose grace moved a kingdom tonight. Let them see that. The laundress and the ritualist, the peasant and the Luna. The combination is why you are here. She pushed the tray closer. Eat, then rest. Tomorrow the real work begins. The king has bought you a night's grace with his command, but by dawn the court will be buzzing like a stirred hornet's nest. They will test you. They will probe for weakness. What should I do? Listen, Moira said, rising. Listen more than you speak. Watch where their eyes go when they think you aren't looking, and when you must speak, speak the plain truth. It will offend them more than any lie, and they won't know how to fight it. At the door she paused. And, child, your mother would be so very proud, not of the title, but of the courage. When she was gone, I finally let the tears fall. Silent, hot streaks of fear, relief, and overwhelming loneliness. I was alone in a tower of power, promoted to queen on a board I didn't understand. Sleep was a futile hope. I paced. I traced the carvings on the furniture, wondering how many hours of labor each one represented. The opulence was suffocating. Just as the moon began its descent, a different sound reached me, not from the hall, but from outside. A low, rhythmic scraping, like stone on stone, coming from the balcony. My breath caught. An assassin? A spy? Seraphine's vengeance? Moving as silently as my mother had taught me, I crept to the glass door. I had no weapon. Before I could fetch the heavy candlestick by the bed, the scraping stopped. Tap, tap, tap. On the glass. Slowly, heart hammering, I inched the door open a crack. The cold night air rushed in.
On the balcony, not a human figure, but a large, sleek raven perched on the balustrade. Its eyes were beads of polished jet in the moonlight. In its beak, it held not a message, but a single, perfect white feather, a feather not native to these stone cliffs. It tilted its head, watching me intently. Then it dropped the feather onto the stone floor, gave a low, guttural croak that sounded oddly like a question, and launched itself into the void, vanishing. I stood frozen. I stepped out and picked up the feather. It was impossibly soft, glowing faintly. A sign? A warning? As I turned it, I saw tiny, almost invisible markings along the shaft, not natural patterning, but minute, deliberate glyphs. They were the same swirling symbols my mother had sometimes drawn in the dirt, symbols, she'd said, of the old language of the moon. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind went down my spine. This was no coincidence. This was a message. And if my mother's old language was being spoken here, in the heart of the king's citadel, then my arrival had awakened more than just the court's scorn. I clutched the feather to my chest and looked back into the luxurious, lonely room. The silence was no longer empty. It was watchful. The games had not ended with the feast. They had moved into the shadows, and now I was not just playing for a title, but deciphering a mystery written in moonlight and feathers, a mystery that whispered my mother's name and promised that the secrets of the celestial chorus were very much alive, and very, very close. Dawn arrived without mercy. I had not slept, the strange feather my only companion in the long, silent hours. Mara arrived with the sunrise, her eyes widening at my simple gray dress still laid out from the night before. "My Lady Luna, your new gowns, the king's tailor—" "They can wait," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Today I need to feel the ground under my own feet." A knock sounded, authoritative and brisk. Before Mara could answer, the door opened. It was not the king nor Lady Moira. A tall, severe woman with steel gray hair in a merciless knot stood there,
clad in the dark robes of a royal administrator. Her eyes, the color of flint, swept over me with dismissive efficiency. I am Matron Helene, mistress of the royal household. His Majesty has instructed you are to be integrated into the routines of the Eyrie. You will begin with a tour of the domestic offices. Follow me. A test, the first of many. A tour of the kitchens, the storerooms, the laundries. A not-so-subtle way to remind me of my place, to see if the new Luna would balk, would reveal embarrassment, or a sense of superiority. I met her flinty gaze. I would like that very much, matron, thank you. A flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed. She gave a curt nod and turned on her heel. The tour was a descent. We left the perfumed halls and descended narrow, spiraling stone stairs into the bustling, noisy underbelly of the citadel. The air grew warm, thick with the smells of baking bread, harsh soap, and sweat. Here was the true engine of the Eyrie, powered by an army of servants. Helene marched ahead, pointing out rooms with clipped explanations. I did not flinch. Instead, I saw familiar things on an impossible scale: the massive copper pots, the mountainous piles of laundry, the work tables scarred from generations of use. I saw girls my own age and younger, backs bent, faces flushed from steam or strain. They stole glances at me, awe, curiosity, fear. They saw the gray dress, but they also saw the matron leading me. They knew I was the whispered-about laundress Luna. In the vast laundry hall, the thunder of boiling water and the rhythmic slap of wet cloth on stone was a symphony I knew by heart. My hands instinctively curled, remembering the ache. A young girl, struggling to wring out a heavy sheet, lost her grip. The wet fabric slapped back into the stone trough, splashing murky water over the floor and onto the hem of Matron Helene's immaculate robe. The girl froze, her face white with terror. "I'm so sorry, matron. I didn't mean—" "Clumsy wretch," Helene snapped, her composure cracking. "That is imported Lycian silk. Do you have any idea of its cost? Your wages for a month wouldn't cover the cleaning." The girl began to cry silently, shoulders trembling. The other workers kept their heads down, movements becoming frantic. A hot surge of memory, the terror of breaking something, of incurring a debt that could never be repaid. Before Helene could pronounce punishment, I stepped forward. I didn't look at her. I knelt on the damp floor, ignoring the cold seep through my dress, and gathered the sodden end of the sheet. "The cost of the robe is not the point," I said, my voice clear enough to cut through the laundry's noise. I looked up at the terrified girl. "What is your name?" "Tess, my lady," she stammered. "Tess," I repeated gently. I began to expertly twist the sheik, my strong, practiced hands forcing the water out in a way her weary ones could not. I finished wringing the section and laid it back. Then I stood, facing Helene. The matron's face was a mask of icy outrage. "My lady, this is highly unregular. Discipline must be maintained." "Discipline built on fear is brittle," I interrupted, the plain truth falling from my lips. "It breaks under the slightest pressure, and then you have a mess and a frightened worker who cannot do her job well." I looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of the other servants who had stopped to watch, spellbound. "I stood where you stand. I know the weight of the water, the burn of the lie. My hands looked like yours." I held up my own, still red and chapped. A title does not wash away memory. A profound silence filled the steamy room, broken only by the drip of water. The servants stared as if I were a spirit from their own ranks. Helene was speechless, her authority deflated, not by a command, but by a shared reality she could not comprehend. I turned back to her. "Thank you for the tour, matron. It was enlightening." I didn't wait for dismissal. I simply walked back toward the stairs, leaving the stunned silence behind. I had not gone 10 steps up the spiral staircase when a shadow detached itself from an alcove. Captain Ryland stood there, his face grim, his travel cloak dusted with mode dirt.
My heart plummeted. "Captain, my siblings." "They are safe, my lady," he said quickly, seeing my panic. "They are in the West Wing, under guard, resting. The journey was eventful." Eventful. The word was a trapdoor opening beneath me. Ryland's jaw tightened. "We arrived just before dawn. The cottage was empty. There were signs of a struggle, an overturned stool, a broken bowl. We tracked them into the woods." He met my eyes, his own burning with a cold fury. "We found them being questioned by two of Lady Seraphine's personal guards." The world tilted. Seraphine. She hadn't retreated. She had struck at my most vulnerable point. Questioned? My voice was a deadly whisper.
They claimed they were ensuring the stability of the territory by verifying your story, that you might be an imposter. Ryland's disgust was evident. They were pressing the boy, Kale, for details about your mother, about your past. He was putting himself between them and the younger girl. He's got a black eye and a fierce spirit. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced my fear. They had touched my family. Where are Seraphine's guards now? In the Ares dungeons, by my order. I informed the king immediately upon our return. He is not pleased. This was no longer a game of courtly humiliation. This was an act of war. Seraphine had sent armed men to terrorize children in the dead of night. Take me to my brother and sister, now. The West Wing was quieter. Ryland stopped before a heavy oak door guarded by two of his men. They're inside. The healer has seen them. The girl is shaken but unharmed. The boy, he is proud. I pushed the door open. The room was sunlit. Mila was curled on a bed, wrapped in a thick blanket, her face pale. When she saw me, a tiny, choked sob escaped her, and she scrambled up, running across the room to throw her arms around my waist. "Ilara, they said you were the queen. They said we had to come with them. And then those other men in the woods, they were so angry." I held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of woods and pine that clung to her. "Shh, little moon, you're safe. No one will touch you again, I promise." Over Mila's shoulder, I saw Kale. He stood by the window, his back to the room, shoulders rigid. One side of his face was swollen, a dark bruise blossoming around his eye. He didn't turn. "Kale." He flinched but didn't respond. I walked to him, placing a hand on his tense arm. He was 14, but in that moment he felt like a wounded wolf pup trying to appear fearsome. "Kale, look at me." Slowly he turned. The fury and humiliation in his single good eye was a mirror of my own. "They called you a liar," he ground out, his voice raw. "They said you were playing a trick on the king. They said we were trash from the woods trying to climb where we didn't belong." A muscle ticked in his jaw. I told them to shut their mouths. That's when he hit me. My heart cracked. "You were brave. You protected Mila." "I wasn't brave enough," he exploded, finally looking at me, eyes blazing. "They had swords, Ilara. What was I supposed to do? Throw pine cones at them? And then these other soldiers show up, barking orders, dragging us onto horses, and now we're here in this giant cage, and they're calling you Luna and bowing, and I don't understand anything." His chest heaved. "So, are you really the queen now? Or is this just another bad dream?" I cupped his bruised face, my thumb gently avoiding the injury. "It's real, Kale. It's complicated and strange and more dangerous than I ever imagined. But yes, the king says I am his fated mate. It's called the Moon Bond." I searched his face, looking for the brother I knew beneath the new title. "Do you want to be with him?" The question was so direct, so pure, it cut through all the political fog. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I feel a connection to him, like a pull. It's not something I chose, but he's been honorable. He sent the guards for you. He's giving me a choice. I glanced at Mila, who was watching us with wide eyes. And he's keeping you safe. That matters more than anything. Kale's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him, leaving only exhaustion and confusion. So what do we do now? We can't go back, not after this. No, I agreed, my voice hardening. We can't, and the woman who sent those men, Lady Seraphine, she is still here. She is powerful, and she is an enemy. I looked from Kale to Mila. We have to be smarter than her. We have to be wolves, not scared rabbits. A spark of the old defiant Kale returned. What do we do first? You heal. You learn, both of you. I looked at Mila. They will offer you tutors, fine clothes. Take them. Learn to read, to write, to understand numbers. Not to become like them, but to have weapons they can't take away. I turned back to Kale. You have a fighter spirit. Channel it. Learn from the king's guards if they'll teach you, not just to brawl, to protect, to be a shield for Mila. I took a deep breath. And for me, I am surrounded by people who smile with poison on their tongues. I need eyes I can trust. The responsibility I was placing on him was immense, but I saw him straighten, a new purpose replacing the anger. He gave a sharp, determined nod. A quiet knock. Mara stood at the door, looking nervous. My Lady Luna, His Majesty requests your presence in the sun chamber. He said it is urgent. I exchanged a look with Kale. The reprieve was over. I kissed Mila's forehead and squeezed Kale's good shoulder. Stay here. Keep the door locked. Trust only Captain Ryland's men. As I followed Mara through the corridors, the feather in my pocket felt like a brand, the silent warning of the raven, the attack on my family. They were connected. I was not just an upstart peasant in the eyes of the court. I was a threat, and the message was clear. The shadows of the Eyrie were not just watching, they were hunting, and my first day as Luna had not yet reached noon. The sun chamber was a smaller, more intimate council room, its walls lined with maps and books. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, etching harsh lines on the faces within. Alpha King Pharaon stood by a great window, his profile gilded in light, but his posture was rigid. Lady Moira was there, her expression grave. Captain Ryland, still dust-streaked, and a grim-faced man in the robes of the king's magistrate, Orin. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the sun's warmth. Pharaon turned as I entered, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over me, taking in my simple dress, the resolute I was struggling to hold on to. He didn't smile. Ilara, your siblings. Safe, angry but safe, I reported, my voice thin. Good. He gestured to the magistrate. Magistrate Orin has taken statements from your brother and from my guards. The two men in the woods carried Lady Seraphine's personal seals. They have confessed, under truth-binding, that they were acting on her direct orders to secure and interrogate your family, to find evidence of deceit before your influence could solidify. A hot, vindictive relief warred with a colder dread. Proof! We have proof! And her punishment? The words came out harder than I intended. Orin cleared his throat. That is the complication, my lady. By law, as a high noble, Lady Seraphine cannot be charged on the testimony of servants or peasants alone. Her own guards' confessions implicate her, but she claims they acted on their own, misinterpreting her concern for the realm. She has demanded a hearing before the High Council of Alphas, where she may defend her honor. A hearing? I repeated flatly, the cold dread one. So she terrorizes children, and we must hold a debate? It is the law, Orin said, though he looked unhappy. It is a shield for the powerful, Lady Moira muttered. Theron's gaze was fixed on me, intense. She is using the system that protects her caste to escape consequence, but she has made one fatal miscalculation. He walked to the table and picked up a small, folded piece of parchment. She did not know about this. He handed it to me. The paper was the same expensive emerald stock as my invitation. The writing was elegant, hurried. The laundress dancer is more than she seems. The old symbols were seen. She must be discredited before the bond settles, or all is lost. Use the family, find the weakness. It was unsigned. A note found hidden in the quarters of one of her captured guards. It speaks of old symbols, Theron explained, his voice dangerously low. My hand went instinctively to my pocket, where the raven's feather lay hidden. My blood ran cold. The old symbols were seen. My dance, the glyphs on the feather, someone here, someone close, recognized them, not just as a lost dance, but as a threat. Seraphine wasn't just acting out of spite, she was acting on information, on fear. The hearing before the council is in 3 days, Theron said. She will try to paint you as an opportunist, your family as liars, your bond as a fraud. She will use every rule, every tradition against you. He stepped closer, his intensity focused solely on me. You have a choice. You can remain silent. Let me fight this political battle for you. He paused. Or you can face her yourself, address the council, not as a victim, but as the Luna. Not with their rules, but with your truth. He searched my face. It is a risk. They will try to tear you apart. I looked from the damning note in my hand to the faces around me. Moira's supportive worry, Ryland's grim loyalty, Theron's challenging expectation. I thought of Cale's bruised face, of Tess the laundry girl's terror, of the mountain of unwashed linens that was my old life. Seraphine thought my weakness was my poverty, my ignorance, but my poverty had forged a strength no noble could understand. My truth was a weapon they had no defense against. I lifted my chin, meeting Theron's stormy eyes in the sunlit room. I will speak, I said, my voice clear and steady. Let her hide behind her laws and her lineage. I will stand before them all, and they will hear the truth from the laundress's mouth, and they will learn that the woman they tried to break is the one who will hold their kingdom together. A fierce, approving light ignited in Theron's gaze. In that moment, the golden thread of the bond between us didn't just hum, it blazed with a shared, defiant fire. The battle lines were drawn. The pawn had left the board. The queen was ready for war. The 3 days were a whirlwind. Lady Moira became my strategist. We pored over lineage charts in my chambers. Seraphine of Highcliffe is not an isolated viper, Moira said, her finger tracing a complex web of names. She is the flower of a thorny bush, the Ashford line. Her uncle sits on the very council you will face. Her cousin commands a border battalion. To pull one thread is to risk unraveling a tapestry. She fixed me with a serious look. Your task is to show them that she is the source of chaos, that true stability lies with a Luna who has the legitimate moon bond and the forgotten magic of the chorus. It felt like a role I could never play. You don't need to project anything, a new voice said from the doorway. Theron stood there, having entered unheard. He dismissed the others with a glance. The bond is not a cloak you put on. It is a current in your blood. You felt it when you danced. That raw truth was what called to the bond, and to me. That is what you must show the council. Not a rehearsed Luna, but a Lara of Ironwood, who loves her family and has the courage of a wolf. His faith was a steadying force, and if they don't believe you, if they side with her, then they side against their king, and against the will of the moon. Later, Mara brought a plain package. Inside was an old, leather-bound book, a history of the celestial chorus. I flipped through pages, detailing rituals, lineages, and there, a beautifully drawn illustration of the vigil of the veiled moon. Beneath it, a name, Leora of the celestial chorus, last true keeper of the vigil. Tears blurred the page. This was a gift, but from whom? On the last page, tucked into the binding, was another white feather, identical to the first. This time, a single glyph was inked on it, a crescent moon cradling a single star. My mother's personal sigil. Someone in the Eyrie was not just sending messages, they were sending me a legacy. The night before the hearing, rest was impossible. I stood on my balcony, the book and the 2 feathers in my hands. The moon was a sharp sliver. The bond was a steady, warm pulse. A faint caw from above. The raven was back, perched on a higher gable. It watched me, then tilted its head towards the distant forest, as if pointing. A realization, cold and clear, dawned on me. This wasn't just about Seraphine's envy. The attack on my family, the fear of the old symbols, the secret gifts, all of it pointed to something deeper. My mother hadn't just left the celestial chorus. Something or someone had made her hide. And now that I had unwittingly revealed the lost rituals, that same thing had been awakened. I was not just preparing for a hearing, I was preparing to step into a hidden war. A war over forgotten magic, my mother's legacy, and the true soul of the kingdom. And tomorrow, before the assembled might of the realm, I would have to take my first stand, not knowing who, besides the king, was truly on my side. The maze had many paths, and in the dark, it was impossible to tell friend from foe. The chamber of the High Council was a circle of judgment carved from cold, gray stone. High, narrow windows cast severe shafts of light onto the floor, illuminating motes of dust that danced like anxious spirits. The air smelled of old parchment, unyielding tradition, and a faint metallic tang of fear. I entered through a side arch, accompanied only by Lady Moira. I wore the deep midnight blue dress, my hair braided simply back, no jewels. My only armor was my posture and the calm I had practiced until my face ached. The tiered benches were packed, a murmuring throng of nobles, their eyes sharp with curiosity, disdain, and open hostility, tracked my every step to the petitioner's bench. The weight of their judgment was a physical pressure. At the far side, on a raised dais under a carved lintel of the moon goddess, sat the 9 members of the High Council of Alphas, old faces, lined with the burdens of rule and war, carved from the same stone as the walls. Among them I saw Lord Corbin, the fox-faced counselor who had questioned me. His gaze was cold, assessing. Next to him, a broad, grim-faced man with a silver-streaked beard, Lord Balthazar, Seraphine's uncle. His eyes were hammers waiting to fall. Alpha King Theron sat in a throne-like chair to the side, separate, a silent, powerful observer. The bond between us was a taut, steadying cord. Then the main doors opened. Lady Seraphine entered, a vision of wronged nobility in mourning gray and silver, her face pale, eyes downcast, the perfect picture of dignified suffering. She took her place opposite me, not deigning to look my way. The chief counselor, an ancient alpha named Gregor with a voice like grinding stone, called the session to order. Lady Seraphine of Highcliffe, you are charged with abuse of power and conspiracy to harm. How do you plead? Seraphine rose, her movements graceful, sorrowful. I plead innocent to these malicious charges, Chief Counselor. Her voice trembled artfully. My heart has ever been devoted to the stability and purity of our realm. When a stranger of unknown lineage captivated our king with a lost dance, was it not my duty to seek the truth? I merely ordered a discreet inquiry to protect our king from potential enchantment. My guards, overzealous in their loyalty, misinterpreted my caution. For that, I grieve. But conspiracy? Harm? Never. She placed a hand over her heart, eyes shining with unshed tears. I am the victim here of slander from one who seeks to climb from the mud to the throne on a ladder of trickery. It was a masterful performance. She had reframed her crime as patriotic duty, painted me as a schemer, and reduced the assault on children to a bureaucratic mistake. Murmurs of agreement rustled through her supporters. Chief Counselor Gregor turned his milky, discerning eyes to me. "Alara of Ironwood, you have heard the defense. The council will hear your account." Every fiber wanted to scream, to denounce the venomous liar across the room, but I remembered Moira's words, "Play none of their games." I stood, walked to the cold stone podium. The silence became absolute and hungry. I placed my hands on the smooth, cool stone. I did not look at the council. I did not look at Seraphine. I looked at the middle distance, gathering the raw, plain truth. "I am Alara," I began, my voice clear, but not loud, carrying in the dead air. "I am from Ironwood. For 5 years, since I was 14, I have worked as a laundress." I lifted my hands, turning them so the light caught the red, cracked skin, the broken nails. "I did not seek your world. I was summoned here by Lady Seraphine, to be mocked as a curiosity in a dress meant to shame me." I paused, letting the image sink in. "When she demanded I danced not to captivate a king, but to honor my dead mother, the only legacy she left me that couldn't be eaten or sold for firewood." My voice wavered, not with performance, but with real grief. "I know nothing of trickery. My mother taught me in our dirt-floor cottage by firelight while my siblings slept. She was Leora. She danced for kings once, then chose love over crowns. That is all I know of her lineage." I finally turned my gaze to the council, meeting each pair of stony eyes. 2 nights ago, my brother Kale, who is 14, and my sister Mila, who is 12, were taken from our home in the dark by armed men. My brother was struck for defending his sister. They were questioned about my mother, about our past. I turned now directly facing Seraphine, who had lost her look of sorrow and was staring with icy hatred. "You did this not for the kingdom. You did it because your game of humiliation failed, because the mud you tried to grind me into revealed a diamond you did not expect. You did it out of spite, and when you were caught, you hide behind your title and call it duty." The accusation rang like a bell in the stone chamber. Lord Balthazar surged to his feet. "You dare speak to a lady of Highcliffe in such a manner, you impudent?" "I dare speak the truth," I shot back, my voice rising, fueled by a lifetime of silent endurance. "What is a title if it is a license for cruelty? What is a lineage if it teaches only contempt for those who struggle?" I swept my gaze across the nobles in the benches. "You all feast in the Eyrie while Ironwood starves. You wear silk while laundry girls' hands bleed. You debate laws while children are hunted in the dark for the crime of being poor. Where is the duty in that?" The chamber was stunned into silence. No one spoke to the High Council like this. No one. It was then that Theron moved. He didn't stand, but his voice, deep and calm, filled the space. "The moon bond is not a theatrical trick, counselors. It is the oldest magic of our kind. I felt it awaken. It recognizes her. Deny her and you deny the goddess's will." He let that seismic threat hang. "And as your king, I ask you, does the law exist to protect the powerful from consequence, or to deliver justice for all, even for a laundress from Ironwood?" The chief counselor, Gregor, studied me for a long, silent moment. He looked at my hands. He looked at my face. He glanced at Theron. Then he looked at Seraphine, beautiful and poisonous. "The evidence of the guard's confession and the intercepted note is direct. Lady Seraphine's actions, motivated by malice rather than duty, constitute a gross abuse. However, the law regarding high noble indictment requires more than testimony.
My heart sank. Was he going to let her go? Therefore, his old eyes sharpened, we invoke the ordeal of the witnessing moon, an ancient, truth-binding ritual performed under the full moon tonight. Both accuser and accused will submit to its light. The moon's magic will reveal their truth in their hearts, for all to see. The council will render final judgment at dawn. A gasp swept the room. The ordeal, ancient, rare, dangerous. It laid one's inner truth bare. For a liar, it could be torture. Seraphine's face went from pale to ashen. Her composure cracked, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated terror. I felt a chill, but also a surge of grim resolve. I had nothing to hide but my pain and my love. Seraphine's heart was a nest of vipers. I met her terrified gaze across the cold stone floor. The silent message was clear. You wanted truth, my lady. Tonight you will drown in it. The hours between the council's decree and moonrise were a suspended, breathless agony. I was sequestered in a small antechamber with only Lady Moira. No food was brought. Participants in the ordeal approached the moon with empty hands and hearts laid bare.
The ordeal is not of pain, but of exposure, Moira explained, her voice low and serious. The magic of the full moon, channeled by the High Priestess, will pull the essence of your intent to the surface. For you, it will feel like a magnifying glass held over your soul. Your love, your fear, your anger, it will all be visible as a radiant aura. She paused, her lips thinning. For Seraphine, for one who harbors malice, deceit, and selfish ambition, it can be searing. The moon's light burns away shadows. She is terrified because she knows what lives in her shadows. I paced the small room, the bond with Theron a steady, warm thrum in my chest, a lifeline. As twilight deepened into violet dusk, we were led out to the sacred grove within the Ares walls. An ancient circle of silver-barked trees stood beneath the vast, open sky. The full moon hung heavy and low, a perfect, luminous pearl, its light so bright it cast sharp, black shadows. The entire council, the king, and a hushed crowd formed a wide ring around the grove's edge. In the center stood the High Priestess, an ageless woman with hair like moonlight itself, dressed in robes the color of the night sky. She held a staff of polished moonstone that glowed with an inner light. 2 simple stone plinths waited before her. Seraphine was brought forward first. She looked fragile, her earlier confidence utterly gone. She was shaking visibly as she was guided to stand on one plinth. Her eyes were wide with animal fear. I was led to the other. The stone felt cool beneath my thin-soled shoes. I looked across at Seraphine, then up at the brilliant, watchful moon. Mother, guide me. Let them see the truth. The High Priestess raised her staff. Her voice rang out, ancient and powerful. By the grace of Selene, she who watches, we call upon the witnessing moon. Let your pure light fall upon these souls. Let intention be made manifest. Let shadow be banished by your glow. Begin the ordeal. She brought the staff down, striking the earth between the 2 plinths. A column of pure, silvery moonlight, brighter than day, shot down from the orb above, engulfing both of us. For me, the sensation was not painful, but profoundly intense. It was as if my skin became transparent. A warm, pulling sensation started in my core. From my heart, light began to emanate, a soft, gold-tinged silver. It swirled around me, forming images visible to all. The small, laughing figure of Mila, Kale's defiant, protective scowl, my mother's gentle hands guiding me through a dance step, the endless, steamy laundry hall, the cold fear of the night my siblings were taken. The light was complex, streaked with sorrow, a deep blue, fierce love, bright gold, righteous anger, flashes of red, and a steady, persistent white hope. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, a visual symphony of a hard, loving life. The crowd murmured in awe. Then all eyes turned to Seraphine. The light around her was a sickly, conflicted thing. At first, a thin veneer of pearly white tried to form, the image of a loyal subject, a concerned noble, but it was immediately eaten away by what surged from beneath. Vivid, venomous, green strands of envy coiled like snakes. Jagged bolts of black hatred lanced outward. Murky clouds of deceit swirled, and at the center, a pulsing, bruised purple core of naked ambition, desperate and greedy. The images within her light were fleeting but clear. Me dancing met not with curiosity but a sneer, a vision of herself on a throne beside Theron, which then shattered. The calculated planning of the invitation, the cold order given to her guards in a shadowy corridor. But then, something else flickered within Seraphine's chaotic aura, a thread of fear that was not about getting caught, an image, hazy and fast, of a symbol, a closed eye within a crescent moon, and a whispering voice, not her own, saying, "The Keeper's line must end." The thread of fear spiked. Seraphine let out a choked gasp, as if the memory itself was a brand. The contrast was absolute, devastating. I stood in a nimbus of difficult, honest light. Seraphine was trapped in a writhing storm of her own venom. The priestess watched, impassive. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she raised her staff again. The column of focused moonlight dissolved, leaving the normal silver glow of the night. Seraphine collapsed to her knees on the plinth, sobbing, not in remorse, but in the agony of exposure. Her truth was laid bare for the kingdom to see. She was a jealous, hateful schemer, and something more. She was afraid of that symbol, afraid of that voice. I stood, breathing heavily, feeling drained but clean, as if a weight had been lifted. Chief Counselor Gregor stepped forward, his face grim in the moonlight. "The moon has witnessed. The truth is irrefutable. Lady Seraphine of Highcliffe, you are found guilty of abuse of power, conspiracy to harm, and bearing false witness. Your titles and lands are forfeit to the crown. You are stripped of your rank and will be held under guard until a place of exile can be determined." The sentence was met with a stunned silence, then a low rumble of acceptance. There was no defense against the moon's judgment. But as guards moved to take the weeping, broken woman away, Lord Balthazar, Seraphine's uncle, stepped forward. His face was a mask of fury, not just at the verdict, but at the deeper secret that had been exposed. "This is not over," he thundered, his voice shaking with rage. "You think you've won, girl. You've only stepped into a larger fire. That symbol, that fear, you have no idea what you've awakened. The closed eye does not forgive, and it does not forget." He was quickly restrained, but his words hung in the moonlit air, a chilling prophecy. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing. Theron was at my side in an instant, his hand under my elbow, steadying me. "You were magnificent," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "The entire realm saw your heart tonight. It is breathtaking." But I barely heard him. My mind was fixed on Balthazar's outburst. The closed eye. The Keeper's line must end. I looked up at Theron, the relief of victory already cooling into a new, deeper dread. "It's not over," I whispered, echoing Balthazar's words. Seraphine was just a weapon. Someone else aimed her. Someone who was afraid of my mother's line, of me. The closed eye. Who are they? Theron's expression darkened, the storm returning to his gaze. He had seen the symbol too. A ghost story from my grandfather's time, a cult that believed the old magics of the celestial chorus were heretical, that sought to purge them from the kingdom. They were thought eradicated. They're not eradicated. I said, the pieces clicking into a terrifying whole. Seraphine, with her ambition and hatred for anything that upset the social order, had been a perfect, unwitting pawn for them. They had fed her suspicions, maybe even discovered evidence of my mother's past, hoping she would destroy me publicly. When that failed, and I was revealed as the Luna, it forced their hand into the open. Balthazar's slip proved they had infiltrated the highest ranks. I was a living symbol of everything they hated: the revived old magic, a powerful female lineage, a direct challenge. The war wasn't against a jealous noble. It was against a shadow that wanted to erase the moon's magic from the world, and I was their primary target. The victory felt hollow, coated in the frost of this new fear. The Eyrie, which had begun to feel like a gilded cage, now felt like a beautiful tomb. Every smile in the corridor could be a mask, every gift a poisoned trick. The wardstone under my floorboard was my only comfort, its faint, steady hum a reminder that not all magic in this place was against me. One evening, suffocated by the stone walls and heavy silences, I slipped out to my balcony. The moon was a waning crescent now, a pale scratch in the sky. I held the 2 white feathers, my only tangible connection to my mysterious ally. A soft caw sounded above. The raven was back, perched on the same gable. This time, it didn't drop a feather. It stared at me intently, then dipped its beak toward the forest beyond the walls. It repeated the gesture 3 times. Urgent. What? What is out there? The raven let out a low, gurgling cry, then took flight, not into the open sky, but down, weaving between the lower towers and battlements, heading toward a secluded, overgrown part of the inner gardens. It was a clear invitation, or a trap. My heart hammered. I thought of telling Theron, of bringing guards, but the raven, the feathers, the book, they felt like a thread meant for me alone, a thread from my mother's world. If the closed eye was watching, involving the guard might scare my contact away forever, or worse, get them killed. Making a decision that was either brave or foolish, I wrapped a dark cloak around my simple dress and slipped out. I moved like my mother had taught me in the dance, light, silent, a shadow among shadows. The moon provided just enough light. I reached the neglected part of the garden, a place of wild hedges, crumbling statues, and a forgotten dry fountain. The air was cold and still. The raven sat on the head of a stone wolf, its eyes gleaming. From behind the broad trunk of an ancient yew tree, a figure emerged. Not a menacing assassin, but an old woman, bent and leaning on a gnarled walking stick. Her face was a web of wrinkles, her eyes milky with cataracts, but she moved with a strange certainty. She wore the rough homespun of a servant. Around her neck, barely visible, hung a pendant, a crescent moon cradling a single star. My mother's sigil. My breath caught. "Daughter of Leora," the old woman whispered, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "I am called Wren. I was your mother's handmaiden long ago in the celestial chorus." "You sent the feathers? The book?" Wren nodded slowly. "I have watched and waited from the kitchens where I scrub pots. I saw the dance. I knew the goddess's hand was upon you, and I saw the shadows stir. The eye has opened again. They are in the castle. They watch the king. They watch you." "Who are they?" "Followers of a dead prophet who saw magic as a curse. They believe the Keeper's line is a key that must be broken, lest the old chaos return. They have spent decades forgetting, erasing. Your existence is their failure." Wren's blind-seeming eyes seemed to look right through me. "They will try again, not with clumsy nobles like the Ashford girl, with subtlety, poison in your cup, a tragic accident. They must discredit the bond and remove the Keeper's bloodline." My blood ran cold. "What do I do?" "Learn," Wren said, urgent. "The book is your foundation, but it is not enough. Your mother's true legacy is not just dances, child. It is the language. The symbols are a key. They can be used to guard, to heal, to see truth, to reveal hidden things. You must learn to use them, not just mimic them. The bond with your king is a well of power, but the chorus's magic is the channel. She reached into her shawl and pulled out a small, flat stone, smoothed by time. On it was carved a complex, interlocking pattern of lines and crescents. This is a ward for protection. Hide it in your room. It will dampen malicious intent, make subtle poisons taste bitter, give you a moment's warning. It is a small thing, but a start. I took the stone. It was warm in my hand. Can you teach me? Sadness crossed her weathered face. I am old, and my sight for this magic is faint. I was never a ritualist, only a keeper of secrets. The true teacher is the legacy itself, the dances, the symbols, the bond. You must listen to them. She suddenly stiffened, her head cocked. They sense the wake of power around you now. I must go. The shadows have eyes. She began to melt back into the darkness. Wait, my mother, why did she really leave? Ren paused, her voice dropping to the faintest whisper. She fell in love, yes, but she also saw the darkness growing. She was warned. She chose to hide the last spark of the true chorus in the last place they would look, in poverty, in obscurity, in the heart of a child. With that, she was gone. The raven gave one last soft call and took wing. I stood alone in the dark garden, the wardstone clutched to my chest. I had an ally, but also confirmation of my deepest fears. The enemy was inside, hidden, patient, and I was their target. I thought becoming Luna was about learning to rule. Now I understood it was about learning to survive. I had to master not just a kingdom's politics, but its oldest, most dangerous magic. And I had to do it while smiling at courtiers who might at any moment be holding a knife behind their backs. The raven had shown me a friend, but it had also shown me the depth of the forest I was lost in, and somewhere in that forest, a closed eye was watching me, waiting for me to stumble. The new wardstone joined the first under the loose floorboard. Together they hummed a quiet, protective duet, a silent sentinel in my heart. My days took on a new, desperate rhythm. Mornings were for the visible struggle, lessons with irritable tutors on history, economics, dizzying genealogies. I struggled, my mind used to the practical calculus of soap and water, not trade tariffs. Their thinly veiled impatience was a constant sting, but I endured. Ignorance was a luxury I could no longer afford. Afternoons, under the guise of rest, were for the hidden war. With Lady Moira as a vigilant lookout, I retreated with the ancient book. But I was no longer just reading. I was listening, as Ren had instructed. I began with the dance, not performing it, but feeling it. I would hold a single pose from the vigil until my muscles trembled, focusing not on the shape, but the sensation it created, a specific hum in my blood, a coolness along my skin, a pinpoint of warmth in my mind. I began to map the dance not as steps, but as a circuit of power within myself.
Then the symbols. I found the glyph for the wardstone, the knot of warding. I spent hours with charcoal and parchment, not just copying it, but pouring my intention into each line. Protection, safety for Kale and Mila, a shield around Theron. At first, just messy drawings, but one afternoon, as I focused with all my might, tracing the final curve, the charcoal line on the parchment shimmered for a fraction of a second. A faint scent of ozone filled the air. I jerked back, heart racing. It was real. The magic was real, and it was answering me. My connection to Theron became my laboratory. The bond was a constant, warm presence, but I began to experiment. During council meetings, where I sat silently by his side, I would try to send a pulse of calm down the bond when I saw his jaw tighten in frustration. Once, I felt a distinct, surprised warmth echo back, and his shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly.
We never spoke of it, but sometimes he would glance at me, a question in his storm-gray eyes, and I would offer a small, secret smile. One evening, he found me on my balcony, staring at my own hands. "You are changing," he said, leaning against the doorway. His voice held no accusation, only curiosity. "I am learning what I am," I replied, not looking at him. "It is frightening." He came to stand beside me. "These hands have washed the clothes of a kingdom," he said softly. "Now they hold its fate. There is a poetry to that which the court's silken gloves will never understand." He hesitated. The magic of the chorus, it was said to be tied to the land's health, that the rituals kept the seasons turning true, the rivers clean. When the chorus faded, so did something of our vitality. We've grown harder, colder. I looked up at him, seeing the weight of kingship, the longing for something purer than politics. "My mother's book speaks of harmony, not control. The dance is a conversation with the world, not a command." "Then converse," he urged, his eyes intense. "The kingdom needs it. I need it." He didn't touch me, but the bond between us swelled, a tide of shared purpose. "I can protect you from blades and poisons, Alara, but I cannot protect you from your own power, nor would I want to. Unleash it. Let them see that the Luna they feared is the goddess-sent healer they've been waiting for." His faith was a catalyst. The next day, an opportunity arose not in the grand hall, but in the castle infirmary. A young stable boy, a favorite for his cheerful spirit, had been crushed by a spooked horse. The healers had set his broken leg, but a deep, raging fever had taken hold. The head healer told Captain Ryland the boy was slipping away. I heard of it from a weeping maid. Without thinking, without planning, I went. The smell of sickness and despair was thick. The boy lay pale, his breathing shallow. The head healer bowed. "My lady Luna, this is no place." "Please," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Let me sit with him." I didn't know what I was doing. I pulled a stool to his side. I remembered a sequence from the book called The Rivulet of Cleansing, a series of gentle hand movements meant to promote healing. It wasn't a dance, but a seated ritual. Ignoring the skeptical looks, I closed my eyes. I reached for the bond with Theron, feeling his steady, strong presence in the distant council chamber. I used it as an anchor. Then I began the movements. My hands flowed slowly over the boy's fevered body, not touching him, tracing patterns in the air. I poured every ounce of my intention into the symbols of cleansing and flow. I thought of cool, clear water. I visualized the fever as a dark smoke drawn out. At first, nothing. Then a warmth spread from my core down my arms, tingling in my fingertips. The air around my hands grew subtly cooler. The boy's restless twitching stilled. His ragged breaths began to even out. I opened my eyes. The head healer was staring, his mouth agape. The boy's skin, which had been flushed and dry, now glistened with a healthy sweat. His eyelids fluttered open, clear and aware, if weak. "The fever," the healer whispered in awe. "By the moon, it broke." I stood suddenly, exhausted as if I had run for miles. "Just let him rest," I managed, and left on unsteady legs. Word spread, not as a political victory, but as a miracle. The laundress Luna had healed where master healers failed. The story was told in kitchens and stables long before it reached the noble quarters. It was a different kind of power, a power that served. That night, drained but strangely fulfilled, I heard the soft tap-tap on my balcony door. The raven. But this time it did not bring a feather or a warning. It dropped a small dried sprig of a silver-leafed herb, Moon's Mercy, a rare plant used in cleansing rituals. It was not a warning, it was an offering, an approval. I smiled wearily at the bird. I was no longer just a student or a target. I was becoming a practitioner, and as my understanding grew, so did the alarm of my hidden enemies. I had given them a new reason to fear me. I wasn't just a symbol of the old magic, I was beginning to wield it. And in a kingdom starved for true magic, that made me more dangerous and more beloved than they could have ever imagined. The Shadow War had just escalated, from elimination to a race for the soul of the realm itself. The healing of the stable boy did more than spark whispers. It ignited a slow, smoldering fire of hope among the common folk of the Eyrie and shifted the sands of power in the court. I was no longer just the king's strange, moon-touched mate. I was a healer, a useful one. For the first time, nobles with genuine ailments or sickly children began to look at me not with scorn, but with a calculating, desperate hunger. Petitions for my blessings appeared mixed with court documents. Lady Moira handled them with a tactical's care. "We must be selective," she advised. "Too many and you appear a common miracle worker. Too few and you seem aloof. We choose cases that are visible, hopeless to conventional healers, and politically safe." It was another maze. My focus was divided, my burgeoning, fragile magic on one side, the gnawing fear of the closed eye on the other. The wardstones were a comfort, but Wren's warning about poison was a constant specter at every shared meal. The next test came not from a sickbed, but from a teacup. It was during a small, informal gathering in the sun-drenched conservatory, a salon hosted by Lady Moira to gently introduce me to the more intellectual nobles. The conversation was stilted, revolving around poetry and music I had no context for. I smiled, nodded, and practiced listening. A young, vibrant noblewoman named Lady Celia, known for her patronage of musicians, was particularly attentive. She was pretty, with laughing eyes, and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the rediscovery of our ancient arts. She poured tea from an exquisite porcelain pot for everyone, chattering about a new composer. When she handed me my cup, our fingers brushed. A sudden, violent jolt shot up my arm, not from the bond, but from the wardstone's magic, reacting to a surge of malicious intent. The tea in the delicate cup seemed to swirl for a second, not with steam, but with a faint, oily rainbow sheen a normal eye would never see. My blood froze. The warmth of the cup felt like a serpent's coil. Lady Celia was still smiling, her eyes bright and innocent. "It's a blend from my own gardens, my Lady Luna. I find it so calming." Every instinct screamed to throw the cup, to denounce her, but the closed eye operated on subtlety. An accusation here, without proof, would make me look paranoid, unstable. It would undo all the goodwill I'd earned. This was their new tactic. Not a dramatic attack, but a quiet, deniable elimination. Thinking faster than I ever had, I brought the cup to my lips as if to sip, but let not a drop pass. I pretended to savor the aroma. "It smells delightful," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "Such a delicate fragrance." I lowered the cup, holding it casually in my lap. "You must tell me about the gardens. I grew up among pines and hard soil. The concept of a pleasure garden is still so novel to me." I launched into a question about rose varieties, forcing Celia to engage. As she answered, I subtly tilted my wrist. The steaming tea poured silently onto the thick Persian rug beneath my chair, a dark stain hidden by the elaborate pattern and the table's shadow. A few minutes later, I set the empty cup on the saucer with a soft click. "Delicious," I lied, a serene smile on my face. "Thank you, Lady Celia." The rest of the salon passed in a blur of heightened awareness. Celia's smile never slipped, but there was a new watchfulness in her eyes, a hint of confusion when I didn't show any immediate distress. When the gathering ended, I moved quickly. In my chambers, I didn't call for guards or the king. I retrieved a wardstone. Then I took the stained section of the rug I had secretly cut away with a small knife, a desperate, risky act. I placed the stone on the stained fabric, closed my eyes, and reached for the magic. This time, I didn't think of protection, but of revelation. I focused on the symbol for unveiling and pushed my will through the bond, drawing on Theron's strength. A faint silver light emanated from the stone, soaking into the tea stain.
Slowly, the wet patch darkened, then separated into distinct, ugly colors, a vivid chemical yellow and a sinister bruised purple. The smell that rose was not of tea, but of bitter almonds and something metallic, nightshade and silverbane. A few sips would have brought paralysis of the heart within hours, looking like a sudden tragedy. Proof. I had proof. But who to trust? Celia was well connected. She would have an alibi. The rug was damaged. The evidence could be called contaminated. I made a decision. I sent for Captain Rylan discreetly. When he arrived, I showed him the hidden evidence, explaining I had a sensitive stomach and noticed a strange residue after spilling the tea. Rylan, a man of action, understood immediately. His eyes turned to flint. Lady Celia's father is a major trade baron. An arrest would cause an uproar. I don't want an arrest, I said, my voice low and fierce. I want her to know that she failed, that I know, and I want you to watch her, not as a suspect, but as a thread. Who does she meet? Who does she fear? She is a tool, Captain. I want the hand that holds her. Rylan nodded, a spark of respect in his gaze. A shadow hunt. It is more dangerous, but it may yield a larger prey. The next morning, I requested a private walk with Lady Celia in the herb garden. We strolled among rosemary and lavender. I was calm, my hands clasped. Your tea was quite memorable yesterday, Lady Celia, I began, my voice conversational. Celia's smile was a touch brittle. I'm so glad you enjoyed it, my lady. Oh, I found it enlightening, I continued, stopping to pinch a leaf of sage. I turned and looked directly into her eyes. My own gaze was no longer that of a hesitant laundress, but of a Luna who had stared down the moon's judgment and held death in a porcelain cup. I do hope your future blends are less complexited, for your sake. I left her standing frozen among the herbs, a puppet who had just felt her strings snap. The message was delivered. The hunter had been spotted by her prey. That evening, Rylan reported. She fled to her chambers, my lady. An hour ago she sent a sealed message by a trusted servant. The servant was intercepted. The note was blank. A blank note, a sign of panic, or a prearranged signal. It means she is reporting failure to someone, I whispered. The hunt for the hand had begun. I had survived an attack more insidious than Seraphine's brute force. I had turned the weapon back on the wielder, but the victory was cold. The closed eye was real. It was here, and it was patient enough to use pretty girls and perfumed tea. The castle walls no longer felt like a shelter, but a beautiful, gilded hive, and I could not tell which bees carried honey and which carried a fatal sting. The silent standoff with Lady Celia cast a long, cold shadow. The blank note she had tried to send was a flare in the dark, confirming a network. Captain Rylan's men became ghosts in the corridors, tracking her every move, noting every hushed conversation, every lingering glance in the crowded court. For me, the world narrowed to a point of hypervigilance. Food was tasted by loyal servants before it reached me. Wine was refused outright. Every bouquet was examined for hidden scents or thorns. The elegant prison of the Eyrie had become a fortress under silent siege. I slept with a wardstone under my pillow. The strain began to show. Dark circles haunted my eyes. The simple joy I had found in my magical studies was tainted by paranoia. Even the golden thread of the bond with Theron felt stretched taut, vibrating with his own simmering fury and helplessness. He could command armies, but he could not root out an enemy that wore the face of his own court. The break came not from Ryland's surveillance, but from Cale. My brother, chafing under protection and stifling idleness, had taken to exploring the less traveled parts of the citadel. He had the sharp eyes and silent footfall of a boy raised in the woods. One afternoon, he slipped away and found me in the library, my head bowed over the ancient book. He followed her, he said, without preamble, his voice low. My head snapped up. Who? Celia? Cale, you can't. It's too dangerous. She didn't see me, he insisted, a fierce pride in his young face. She went to the old music room, the one they say is haunted. She wasn't alone. My blood stilled. Who was with her?
An older man wears a gray robe like a scholar. He has a mark on his hand, A faded tattoo, like a closed eye with a line through it. The confirmation was like a key turning in a lock. The closed eye. Here, in the flesh. What did they say? Kale's expression turned grim. The older man was angry. He said the keeper's whelp has a guardian spirit. He said the simple methods had failed because her magic was awakening faster than they predicted. He told Celia she was compromised, that her thread was cut. Kale hesitated, swallowing. Then he said, if the root cannot be poisoned, we must set a fire that consumes the whole tree. They're planning something bigger, Alara, not just for you, for everyone. A fire that consumes the whole tree? The words echoed with terrifying implication. An attack on the Eyrie itself. A disaster so public it would discredit not just me, but Theron for choosing me, and the very concept of the old magic. I grabbed his shoulders. You must tell no one else. Not yet. Where is this music room? He described its location in the oldest western wing, a place of disused grandeur. I had to act, but going to Theron or the council with a child's hearsay would not be enough. I needed proof. I needed to see the mark, to hear the plans myself. It was a reckless, stupid idea. It was also the only one I had. That night, using the skills of silence my mother and my poverty had taught me, I became a shadow. I wore a dark servant's dress, smudged ash on my face. With a wardstone in my pocket and my heart a frantic drum, I slipped into the labyrinth of the western wing. The air grew colder, the torchlight sparse. The grandeur here was decayed, tapestries moth-eaten, suits of armor standing like lonely sentinels in the dust. I found the music room door slightly ajar, a sliver of dim light spilled out. Holding my breath, I peered inside. The room was vast, dominated by a covered harpsichord. Two figures stood by a dead fireplace, Lady Celia looking hollow and terrified, and a man just as Kale described. He had a lean, intellectual face that might have been handsome if not for the cold emptiness in his eyes. As he gestured, his sleeve fell back. On the back of his right hand was the tattoo, a stylized eye, its lid shut, slashed by a single line. The ingredients are secured, the man was saying, his voice a dry, precise rasp. It will be introduced into the grain stores for the Zenith Feast's bread, slow-acting, untraceable until it's too late. A royal feast struck by a wasting sickness, the king, his court, his Luna, all dying together. The people will see it as a curse, a judgment from the moon against the unnatural union and the resurgent heresy. Panic will dismantle the kingdom from within. The old, pure order will rise from the ashes. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Poison the feast? Not just me. Hundreds. A massacre disguised as divine wrath. Celia whimpered. And me? You said I would be spared. The tread was cut, the man repeated coldly. You are a liability, but do not worry. Your end will be swift, and will serve the narrative. A tragic victim of the Luna's cursed magic, found too late. He reached into his robe. I didn't think. I acted. I burst into the room. Stop! Both figures whirled. Celia shrieked. The man's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed into pits of ice. The root comes to the fire, a gift. He lunged, not for Celia, but for me. He wasn't a warrior, but he was fast and desperate. He grabbed for my throat. I stumbled back, the wardstone in my pocket flaring hot. I fell against the harpsichord, my hand scrambling, closing around the leg of a heavy, ornate music stand. As he came at me again, I swung. The iron stand connected with his temple with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. I stood over him, panting, my whole body trembling. Celia was sobbing against the wall. The proof was at my feet, but the plot was still in motion. The poisoned grain. The feast was in 2 days. Then, from the doorway, a slow, sarcastic clap echoed. Lord Corbin, the fox-faced counselor, stood there, a faint, unpleasant smile on his lips. Two hard-eyed men in unmarked leathers flanked him. Brava, my Lady Luna, quite the savage little display. Skulking in shadows suits you more than silk. His eyes flicked to the unconscious man. A pity you found Brother Silas. He was a useful tool, but tools can be replaced. His smile vanished. Take her, and silence the other one. The two guards moved forward. I raised the music stand, but my arms were like water. I was trapped. Corbin was the hand. He had been in the council all along. As the first guard reached for me, a roar of pure elemental fury shook the very stones of the room. Alpha King Theron filled the doorway, Captain Rylan and a squad of guards at his back. His face was a mask of apocalyptic rage, his eyes blazing with stormlight. The bond between us screamed with his protective fury. You, Theron growled, the word dripping with lethal promise. His gaze was locked on Corbin. You viper in my council. Corbin's smugness evaporated, replaced with pallid fear. Your Majesty, this is a misunderstanding. I discovered this plot myself. You were about to murder my mate and frame her for a massacre, Theron finished, his voice a deadly whisper. He took a step into the room, and the air grew thick with the pressure of his unleashed alpha power. The guards with Corbin fell to their knees, whimpering. Theron looked at me, still clutching the music stand. The rage in his eyes softened for a fraction of a second into a look of such profound relief and pride it made me want to weep. Then his attention snapped back to Corbin. Take him, Theron commanded, his voice like falling stone. Rylan, take them all to the dungeons. Use whatever means necessary to find out about the grain. Every name, every plan. He finally walked to me, gently prying the iron stand from my numb fingers. He didn't embrace me, he simply stood between me and the rest of the room, a living shield. Are you hurt? I shook my head, unable to speak. The danger was past, for now. The thread had been pulled and the spider was caught. But as they led a broken Corbin away, and as the scale of the planned atrocity sank in, I knew the price. The hidden war was over. It was now an open purge, and the fire they had tried to set might yet catch because fear and suspicion had been sown deep into the heart of the kingdom. The real cost of victory was just beginning to be counted. The fallout was swift and merciless. The Eyrie thrummed with the grim, efficient silence of a military operation. Lord Corbin, Brother Silas, and their accomplices were taken to the deepest cells. Under the king's personal command, Captain Rylan began the grim work of interrogation. The threat of a poisoned grain that would have slain hundreds left no mercy. There was no patience for nobility or protocol now. I was sequestered in the king's own private solar, guarded by his personal sentinels. Theron had not left my side, his presence a solid, unyielding bulwark against the aftershocks of terror. Kale and Mila were brought there too, their faces pale with a fear too young to comprehend. It was Kale who broke the heavy silence. Did I do right? He asked, his voice small, the brave facade crumbling to reveal the scared boy beneath. I pulled him into a fierce hug. You were magnificent, Kale. You were the wolf who found the trap. You saved everyone. The words caught in my throat. His sharp eyes and woodcraft had uncovered the thread that led to the heart of the darkness. Theron put a hand on the boy's shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. You have the heart of a guardian. When this is over, if you wish it, you will train with Captain Rylan himself, not as a duty, as an honor. Kale's eyes widened with stunned, hopeful awe. He nodded, a new kind of strength straightening his spine. The information came in broken, terrified pieces. The poisoned grain, a blight-like fungus, had already been delivered to the royal mill. It was retrieved within hours. The plot was dismantled, root and branch. But the revelations went deeper. Names were named, connections mapped. The closed eye was a smaller cell than feared, but its tendrils had reached into the treasury, the archives, and the High Council. Their goal was chaos, to shatter faith in the monarchy and the old ways, allowing a purified order to rise. I, the Keeper's heir and the moon-bonded Luna, was the living symbol of everything they sought to destroy. 3 days later, with the immediate threat neutralized, Theron called a full gathering in the Grand Hall. Not a feast, but an assembly. Every noble, official, and garrison commander was summoned. The air was electric with dread and curiosity. I stood beside Theron on the dais. I did not wear a crown. I wore the simple midnight blue dress, my mother's ancient book held against my chest like a shield. I was no longer just the laundress, the dancer, the accused. I was the survivor, the uncoverer of rot, the Luna who had stood in the path of a silent spiritual war. Theron did not sit. He stood at the edge of the dais, his voice stripped of all courtly ornament, ringing with the raw, hard truth of a king. You have heard whispers. Now you will hear facts. He laid it out with brutal clarity. Seraphine's envy, Corbin's conspiracy, the planned poisoned massacre, the ideology of the closed eye. He named the traitors, he described the evidence. He did not ask for the council's judgment, he pronounced it. Exile for the lesser accomplices, execution for the ringleaders. The Ashford family's influence was to be permanently broken. The hall was dead silent. The scale of the betrayal was too vast for outrage. Then Theron turned. He held out his hand to me. They targeted her because she represented what they feared most, a return to balance, a strength not of domination but of harmony, a strength born not of bloodline but of character and sacrifice. He looked at the assembled nobility, his gaze sweeping over them like a cleansing wind. For too long, this court has confused wealth for worth and title for honor. She has shown us the truth. The worth of a kingdom is measured in the health of its most humble pack. Its honor is kept by those who serve, not just those who rule. He paused, his eyes finding mine. The moon bond chose. The kingdom has been tested, and I have chosen. His voice grew louder, filling the vast space. Ilara of Ironwood, daughter of Leora, keeper of the chorus, is my moon bond. Not by my decree alone, but by right of magic, by proof of courage, and by the will of a people who have seen her heal where others could not. He took the ancient book from my hands and held it aloft. This is not a relic of a dead past. It is a seed for our future, and she is the one who will help it grow. He faced the hall again, his final words dropping like stones into a still pond. Let there be no more debate. Let there be no more shadows. The old ways and the new king are united. The next wolf who raises a hand or a whisper against my Luna will answer directly to me. It was not just an acceptance, it was a coronation by fire and truth. There were no cheers, but a deep, resonant acknowledgement hung in the air. The challenge in his words was absolute. The war was over. A new era was beginning. Later, in the quiet of the royal gardens under the waxing moon, I finally found my voice. You didn't have to do that. The bond, my safety, that was enough. Theron stood beside me, looking up at the silver sliver in the sky. It wasn't about safety, Ilara. It was about justice, and about claiming what is mine in the full light of day, with no shadows left to hide in. He turned to me, the moonlight etching his strong features in silver and shadow. For weeks I have watched you. I have seen you navigate mockery with grace, face hatred with courage, uncover treason with cleverness, and heal the sick with a power that is a gift to us all. The bond told me you were my mate, but you have shown me you are my queen. He took my hand, his thumb brushing over the calluses on my palm, the map of my old life. I don't know how to be a queen in the way your court expects. A genuine smile, rare and beautiful, touched his lips. Good, be a queen in the way the kingdom needs. We will write the rules together. He leaned in, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me, but he simply rested his forehead against mine, a gesture of profound intimacy and respect, a meeting of minds and souls under the watching moon. The bond swelled, not with passion, but with a deep, abiding promise of partnership, of protection, of a shared destiny. The most important step was not behind me in a grand hall. It was ahead, on the long, hard, hopeful road of building a future where no child would ever be hunted in the dark for the crime of being poor, and where the magic of the moon belonged to everyone. The changes began subtly, but their roots ran deep. The morning after the assembly, I did not go to the solar for tutelage on lineage. I went with Lady Moira and a reluctant but obedient scribe to the servants' hall. The vast room fell into a stunned silence as I entered. I saw Tess, her eyes wide, a polishing rag frozen in her hand. I did not mount a dais. I stood on the same stone floor they stood on. "My name is Alara," I began, my voice clear in the quiet. "You know where I came from. You know what I did. The king has declared me Luna, but a title is just a word. It is action that matters." I took a deep breath. I am establishing a council, not of nobles, of you. A voice from the halls, the kitchens, the stables, the laundries, to speak to me, and through me to the king, of the true needs of the Eyrie, not the wants of the court, the needs of the people who make it run. The silence deepened, then broke into a wave of hesitant, disbelieving murmurs. "Who would you trust to speak for you?" I asked. Eyes shifted. Then, slowly, an older woman with hands scarred by decades at the hearth stepped forward. "I would speak, my lady, for the kitchens." Then a grizzled groom, "For the stables." And Tess, her voice a mere whisper, but her chin lifted, "For the laundries." The first stone was laid. Theron, when I told him, he did not dismiss it. He listened, his storm-gray eyes thoughtful. "A council of the unseen," he mused. "It will outrage the traditionalists. Will you allow it?" He looked at me, a flicker of that fierce pride in his gaze. "I declared you my partner, Alara. I do not make idle declarations. Their outrage is the sound of change. Let them roar. We will build." And so we built. The days took on a new shape. Mornings were still for learning, but the subjects changed. I studied agriculture with the master gardener, trade routes with the comptroller, not from scrolls of theory, but from their lived experience. Afternoons I met with my new council, the Hearth Council they began to call themselves. They spoke of faulty ovens that wasted wood, of leaky stable roofs that sickened horses, of the brutal cost of the harsh imported soap that cracked their hands. I brought their words to Theron, and he acted, not with grand decrees, but with specific, targeted orders. Repair the ovens, mend the roofs, source gentler, local soap. Small things, vital things. The magic, too, found its purpose. I did not perform grand rituals. I worked with the old healer in the infirmary, showing him the symbols for cleansing and mending from my mother's book. We experimented with poultices of moon-touched herbs, with whispered incantations over broken bones. The results were slower, less spectacular than my first healing, but more sustainable. The healer, once skeptical, now looked at me not as a lady, but as a colleague. One afternoon, I found Kale in the training yard, sweat-soaked and grinning, trading blows with a young guardsman under Captain Ryland's watchful eye. He moved with a new, focused ferocity. He was not just fighting, he was learning to protect. Mila, in the solar with her tutor, was reading a simple history aloud, her voice gaining confidence with each word. She looked up and gave me a smile that held no trace of the terror from the woods. The raven was seen less often, but once I found a single white feather on my balcony table, lying across a newly drawn map of the kingdom's water sources, a silent blessing from my unseen ally.
Yet the peace was not absolute. The purge of the closed eyes sympathizers had created vacancies, resentment. Whispers still slithered in certain corners of the court. Lord Balthazar's family, though stripped of Seraphine's direct holdings, still held power. Their eyes were cold whenever they passed me. The bond with Theron was my constant. It had settled into a steady, warm hum, a silent conversation that flowed between us. In council meetings, I could feel his impatience with postering nobles, his satisfaction when a just decision was reached. Sometimes, in the garden at dusk, we would simply walk. We spoke of small things, the stubbornness of a particular rosebush, the antics of a palace hound. We did not speak of love. That word was too vast, too tangled with politics and fate. But we spoke of trust, of respect, and sometimes in the comfortable silence, that felt like more. The true test came with the first frost. Reports arrived from the outlying territories, including Ironwood. The harvest had been poor, the early cold was biting. Hunger, that old familiar ghost, was stirring. The court's response, proposed by a wealthy lord from a fertile southern valley, was a tax of grain from the richer packs to be distributed as needed. It was a clean, bureaucratic solution from a distance. I stood in the council chamber, my heart pounding. This was about life and death on a scale I knew intimately. That tax, I said, my voice cutting through the debate, will arrive too late, and it will be administered by those who do not know where the need is sharpest. It will be wasted or stolen. The Lord scoffed. And what would my Lady Luna suggest? We cannot magic grain from the air. I ignored him, turning to Theron. The problem is not a lack of grain in the kingdom. It is a blockage in its flow. The storehouses in the Central Valley are overflowing, but the merchants hoard it, waiting for the price to rise as the North Star starves. They use the bad roads and the early frost as excuses. And your solution? Theron asked, his gaze intent. Command, not a request. I met his eyes, drawing strength from the bond. Issue a royal decree. All surplus grain in the central storehouses is to be released for transport north at a fixed, fair price. Mobilize the King's Guard not as enforcers, but as escorts. Use their strength to clear the worst of the road blockages. Pay local peasants from Ironwood and other territories to do the work, with grain as their wage. It puts food in their hands immediately, clears the roads for the future, and breaks the merchant's stranglehold. It is not a gift. It is a circulation. The chamber was silent. It was a plan of action, not theory. It came from understanding both the weight of the king's authority and the desperation of an empty belly. Theron looked at me for a long moment, then he turned to his scribe. Draft the decree, as the Luna has outlined. He arose, his decision final. We do not ask, we act. The kingdom's blood must flow, or its limbs will die.
As the council dissolved into shocked chatter, he walked to me. He did not smile, but his eyes were alight. You did not just see the problem, Ilara. You saw the system. That is how a ruler thinks. It was the highest praise he could have given. That night, standing on the balcony watching the stars, I felt the feather-light touch of a snowflake on my cheek. Winter was coming. But for the first time, I was not huddled in a crumbling cottage, dreading its arrival. I was in a stronghold. I had a voice. I had a partner. And I had a people to help weather the storm. The laundress from Ironwood was gone. In her place stood the Luna, and she was just getting started. Spring came to the Eyrie not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow, stubborn thaw. The ice on the battlements wept away in the sunlight. Green shoots pushed through the dark earth of the kitchen gardens. And in the heart of the kingdom, a different kind of growth was taking root. The grain decree had worked. It had been messy, fraught with complaints from wealthy merchants and logistical headaches, but it had worked. Food had reached Ironwood and the other northern territories before the deepest hunger set in. The King's Guard, clearing roads and guarding shipments, had been seen not as overlords, but as protectors. Stories trickled back, not of a distant, uncaring crown, but of a king who acted and a Luna who understood. My days were a tapestry of new threads. The Hearth Council was now a formal weekly meeting. We had moved from complaints to proposals. Tess, with a new confidence, presented a plan for recycling lye from the ash of the great hearths, saving coin and sparing hands. The master gardener consulted with me on planting cycles, using old almanacs from my mother's book that spoke of moon phases and soil health. The magic, my magic, had found its rhythm. It was no longer a spectacular, desperate force, but a subtle tool. I worked with the healers, teaching them the signs of moon sickness in newborns, the herbal blends that worked best under a waxing crescent. I learned to strengthen the ward stones, their protective hum now a constant, quiet backdrop to my life in the Eyrie. Cale earned his first real praise from Captain Rylan for disarming a fellow trainee without drawing blood. Mila now helped the royal librarian organize scrolls, her quick mind delighting in the order of words and knowledge. Theron and we had settled into a partnership that was both comfortable and electrifying. We ruled side by side. He handled the broad strategies of defense and alliance. I focused on the internal tapestry, the health, the justice, the small, vital details of life. In the evenings, we often reviewed the day's affairs in his study. The bond between us was a deep, steady river, flowing with shared purpose, mutual respect, and an affection that had grown quietly, like moss on stone. One such evening, as the fire crackled, he looked up from a trade report. Lord Balthazar has requested an audience. He wishes to formally pledge his house's loyalty to the Luna. I set down my quill. The Ashfords had been quiet since Seraphine's exile and Corbin's execution. This was not surrender, it was a strategic retreat, a weaving of a new thread into the existing power structure. He fears being left outside the new tapestry, I said softly. Theron's gaze was sharp. Do you trust him? No, I said honestly, but I trust his self-interest, and a thread that is woven in, even under tension, is less dangerous than one left loose to snag. I met his eyes. Let him pledge, but his son will train with Cale in the guard, and his daughter will serve on a committee with Mila, distributing alms. Let their loyalty be tested in action, not just words. A slow smile spread across Theron's face. It was the same fierce, proud smile from the hall, but softer now. You weave with wisdom, my Luna. Later, I walked alone in the moonlit garden, the place where Wren had first appeared to me. I had not seen the old woman or her raven in months. I hoped it meant the immediate danger had passed, that the closed eye was truly shattered. I touched the pendant I now wore openly, my mother's crescent and star, a gift from Theron, forged in silver from a mine in ironwood. A soft rustle in the yew tree. Not a raven, a small gray owl perched on a low branch, its eyes large and solemn. It stared at me, then dropped a single withered sprig of rosemary at my feet before gliding silently away. Rosemary, for remembrance. I picked it up, understanding. The warning was over. The guidance remained. Remember where you came from. Remember what you protect. I looked back at the Eyrie, its towers silvered by the moon. It was no longer a cage of gilded shadows. It was a stronghold, my home. But its strength was not just in its stones. It was in the mended oven in the kitchen, in the clear water of the wells, in the children who slept with full bellies, in the guards who saw themselves as servants of the people. I had entered these walls as a punishment, a joke in a gray dress. I would help rule them as a healer, a keeper, and a queen. The feast had been meant to break me. My dance had begun a revolution. But revolutions are not a single glorious moment. They are the slow, patient, daily work of laying one stone upon another, of weaving one true thread into the next.
The story of the laundress who became Luna was not a fairy tale ending, it was a beginning, and as I stood there, the scent of rosemary in my hand and the moon on my face, I knew the most important work was not behind me in a blaze of magic and revelation. It was ahead, in the quiet, relentless, beautiful act of building a kingdom worthy of its people. A kingdom where the magic of the moon and the strength of the wolf belonged to everyone. My story was not about a crown won, it was about a root, long buried, finally breaking through stone to reach the light, and it was just starting to grow. The end. And so the final note of our tale hangs in the air, as delicate and full of promise as a seed upon the wind. Alara's journey from the icy basin of Ironwood to the sunlit throne of the Eyrie was written not in gold, but in grit, grace, and the unbreakable threads of truth. But dear listener, the most enchanting stories are never truly finished. They simply turn the page. What whispers will stir in the corridors of the Eyrie now? Will the roots of the closed eye find a way to grow again in the deepest, darkest soil? And as the bond between Alara and Farron deepens from partnership into something even more profound, what new magic might bloom from the union of a king's strength and a keeper's heart? The loom of fate is never still, new threads await. If you yearn to see what tapestry they weave next, if your soul aches for more tales of moonlit magic, fierce loyalty, and love that defies every boundary, then let your voice be heard. Kiss the heart, leave a comment, and tell us you demand a part 2. Subscribe to the Alpha Omega Love Diary so you never miss a single spell-binding chapter. For in this realm, your devotion is the most powerful magic of all. It is the key that unlocks the next enchanted door. Until next time, under the watching moon, keep believing.